Welcome back to Architecture Topics. I'm your host, Liam Karen, and today we are going to New York. We're going to take a walk up Fifth Avenue, stop at 89th Street, and step into a building that turned the city and modern architecture on its head. I'm talking about the Solomon Guggenheim Museum by Frank Lloyd Wright. Before diving into it, I wouldn't be a good host if I didn't remind you to subscribe to Architecture Topics wherever you are listening. It only takes a second, but it really helps us see whether you are enjoying this content or not. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. I promise I'll be here when you come back. Okay, great. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get started. When Wright was first approached about the museum in June 1943, he wasn't exactly eager. The person chosen by the Solomon Guggenheim Foundation to scout an architect for this ambitious project was Hilary Bay. Bay was a German-born baroness, abstract artist, and the foundation's first director. She had a vision, and she had authority. Wright, on the other hand, was in his late 70s. He was already a living legend. He didn't have to prove himself to anyone. But still, he refused to put his best days behind him. He wanted to stay relevant, even if that meant pushing against the direction architecture and the modern city itself seemed to be taking. Cities were getting taller, denser, and more mechanical. The skylines of places like New York were filling with towers that were sleek, repetitive, and anonymous. To Wright, it all felt cold, predictable, and standardized. The architectural equivalent of a pressed white shirt. Clean, yes, but lifeless. He hated that. He called Manhattan's skyline a forest of skyscrapers. Dense, lifeless, mechanical. He didn't like New York. He didn't like museums. And more than anything, he didn't want to build in a city whose grid he found oppressive and dehumanizing. Bay's request seemed like a mismatch on every level. And so Wright said, no. But Bay was persistent. She wasn't looking for just any architect. She wanted someone with vision, someone who could create a temple for non-objective art, not just another gallery with white walls and right angles. She wanted a spiritual experience, and she had her mind set on Frank Lloyd Wright, so she insisted. What followed was something like an aesthetic courtship. Wright didn't say yes, at least not right away. Instead, he sent her books, sketches, writings on Japanese architecture, and organic forms. He was testing her. Because if he was going to do this, if he was going to step into a city he couldn't stand, for a type of building he disliked, it would be entirely on his terms. Bay, to her credit, went along. She gave him freedom. Space, encouragement. In one letter, she wrote, "I want a fighter, a lover of space, a colorist, a structural engineer, and a poet." Wright, famously never lacking in self-confidence, may have seen in her a rare thing. A client who didn't want to control him, but to unleash him. And maybe, just maybe, he saw something else too. An opportunity to challenge the modern city from within, to plant something radically different right in the heart of the machine. So in late 1943, Wright finally accepted the commission to design the Guggenheim Museum in New York. The project would go through a long and complicated design process spanning 16 years, with construction not beginning until 1956, and the building finally opening in 1959, 6 months after Wright's death. From the moment Wright accepted the commission, he made one thing clear. He wasn't going to design a conventional museum. Wright believed traditional museums were depressing places, cold, fragmented, designed more for curators than for visitors, People, he said, were forced to shuffle along from room to room in a kind of tomb-like silence. He wanted none of that. Instead, he envisioned a space that would feel alive, organic, flowing, and continuous. A place where visitors could move naturally, without interruption. Not a building to walk through, but one to experience. The central idea came early. A spiral, a ramp that would gently rise from the ground up, wrapping around a central atrium. No stairs, no separate rooms, just one continuous path where art would unfold as you move through space. The atrium would be culminated by a massive glass skylight flooding the space with natural light. Imagine stepping into the atrium and looking up. Instead of a ceiling, you see a ribbon of white concrete uncoiling upward toward a glass oculus. No doors, no corridors. Just a soft, upward swirl of space. The walls would slope slightly as well, following the curve of the ramp. This meant that even the display surfaces would be tilted, something which Wright believed would help the art breathe. But not everyone was on board with these ideas. Artists, museum professionals, and even members of the Guggenheim Foundation itself. Some worried the curved walls and sloped floors would make it impossible to hang paintings properly, and that the always changing natural light would not allow to view the art well, or that it might even damage it. Others said the building would overshadow the art. Hilary, ironically, had her own concerns. She thought the design might be too modern, too unconventional, even for her. But Wright didn't flinch. He saw architecture as art, as a philosophy. And if the art didn't fit the building, well, maybe the art needed to evolve. But as it often happens in projects that defy the norm, designing the Guggenheim was one thing, but building it and doing so in New York City, that was another story entirely. From the start, Wright's plans clashed head-on with the city's building codes. The building didn't have traditional floors or clear fire exits in the conventional sense. And that inverted ziggurat form, widening as it rose, was basically the opposite of what the codes allowed. The city's regulations had been written for boxes, and Wright had drawn a spiral. The city's regulations imposed buildings should get narrower as they rose, and Wright did the opposite. And it wasn't just a matter of paperwork. There were real questions. Would firefighters be able to navigate the sloping ramp in an emergency? Could the skylight handle New York winters? Would the cantilevered concrete hold? But this wasn't just any project. It was Frank Lloyd Wright's first and only project in New York City. And it was the Guggenheim Foundation. Wright's reputation, along with the cultural weight of the museum, gave the project a kind of diplomatic immunity. The city didn't rewrite its codes, but it bent them. Through years of back and forth negotiations, zoning exceptions were granted. Materials were tested and retested. Fire exits were rethought, recalculated, and creatively designed into the spiral. In many ways, the Guggenheim became a case study in how architecture can push bureaucracy to evolve. The building wasn't just breaking stylistic norms, it was forcing the system to adapt. It was 1956, 13 years into the project. And still, construction hadn't even begun. By then, Solomon Guggenheim had passed away, Hilary had been pushed out of the foundation, and Wright was 89 years old. And yet, somehow, the project was still alive. When the ground was finally broken on the Upper East Side, it wasn't with fanfare. It was with quiet exhaustion. Lawsuits had been threatened. Donors were restless. The budget had ballooned. And the Guggenheim Foundation had at several points, seriously considered abandoning Wright's design altogether. But Wright wasn't about to let that happen. He was still making changes, still fighting for his vision. Even on site, he would scribble new ideas, tweak the curvature, and defend every decision like it was a matter of principle, which for him, it was. The structure that finally began to rise was unlike anything New York had seen. No steel frame, no glass curtain walls. Instead, poured concrete, smooth, curved, and continuous. A spiral that emerged slowly from the city's rigid grid like it had no idea it wasn't supposed to be there. As the building neared completion, criticism ramped up again. Some artists still hated it. They said it was anti-art. Wright, in typical Wright fashion, replied that the building made the paintings look better than they ever had in a box. He wasn't designing a backdrop. He was designing a stage. The Guggenheim Museum officially opened its doors to the public on October 21st, 1959. Sadly, Frank Lloyd Wright didn't live to see it. He died 6 months earlier in April of that year at the age of 91. The opening was a spectacle. Crowds lined up outside. Critics and journalists came with sharpened pens, and New York, for a moment, paused to look at this strange white spiral rising at the edge of Central Park. Still, not everyone liked it. In fact, many didn't. Some even called it the toilet bowl. Others said that Wright had built a sculpture instead of a museum. But visitors came, and they kept coming. Over time, the shock wore off. The novelty faded. And what was left was vision. People began to understand and appreciate what Wright had done. Today, the Guggenheim is one of the most iconic buildings in the world. A landmark of modern architecture, a pilgrimage site for students, architects, artists, and tourists alike. And that, dear listener, is all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Architecture Topics. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who loves architecture as much as you do. I'm Liam Caron, and I'll see you next time. Until then, keep looking up.